Welcome to Ira's Everything Bagel, where I talk with intriguing people about everything, their passions, pursuits, and points of view. Well, while it's true that Hollywood isn't what it used to be, the giants that built and maintained the dream factories, as well as representing the top talent over the decades, remain in the consciousness of many Americans. One such giant was Norman Brokaw. My guest today is the son of that legendary agent. Joel Brokaw is author of Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw. It's available on Amazon, Barnes& Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about Joel, go to joelbrokaw.com. And Joel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ira.
Question for you before we even get into your dad. Can you set the scene for us in terms of what Hollywood was like when your father first got into the business?
Well, I think the only thing that has been constant in the entertainment business has been change. And I think my father was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. There was, he came there in 1943, and radio was kind of king at that time. Motion pictures obviously was huge as well. But lurking in the background was something called television. And my father would go on to play a major role in the transition of television from being a novelty to becoming a mainstay of American life. And so it was a very exciting time, for sure.
Did he have an instinct for what was coming? You mentioned television just on the horizon. Did he know that this was going to be a major cultural influence in America and a major commercial influence as well?
On the contrary, I think that when the first impression that he had about this thing that his boss had warned him was something that was going to become very important, and they think that it was going to be called television. So he was asked to form the first uh, West Coast television department for the agency. And he thought he was being demoted. He was a young motion picture agent, and he was just enjoying himself immensely. And then suddenly he was given a 16 millimeter projector and a screen and set up in a little tiny office that they converted from a parking structure and told, do something with this. And so if anything, he was not enthusiastic about it. But being the person who he was able to see opportunities where other people saw limitations. And he came up with an idea that effectively jump-started the whole production of filmed comedic and dramatic programs for television. Because at the time when it first debuted, it was all a bunch of talking heads. It was news, it was some sports, it was bowling, and a lot of live theater where they just stuck the camera out there. So it was, it was not looked upon as being a great opportunity until, as I said, until some people like my dad got involved and was able to develop these opportunities.
Was he also aware that he could, I don't know if the word is poach, but he could certainly bring celebrities from the world of radio to television as well?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that was part of the immediate body of content was in converting uh, the radio shows into TV programs. But I think what he did, he recognized the fact that a lot of the big name people in Hollywood were very reluctant to get involved with it. And so the first thing that he did was he created a list of actors who still had a recognizable name, but maybe weren't in demand like they were before. And similarly, he created another list of B movie directors who were able to generate content quickly and cheaply. And he put those two lists together, and that was where some of the first hit television shows started, like Racket Squad and My Little Margie and so on, which meant most of the people probably watching this have never heard of, especially if they're under 65 years of age.
Probably correct, although Gail Storm was in the My Little Margie.
That's correct.
Yes. So, was he one of the first, or maybe the first, to recognize the art of packaging, as they used to call it, in the maybe they still do in the world of agencies?
Well, let us just say that packaging had been part of the business from radio. And basically, for those unfamiliar with the term, it basically meant that the agency, from soup to nuts, handled everything with the program, from both representing the talent that was in front of the screen and the major talent that was behind the screen. And then they went and they found the advertiser, and then they came to the network and said, "Here's the whole package." And so that's, as I said, that became a major form of income for the agency. And I don't know if it's still practiced to the extent. I've kind of fallen out of the information flow because the business has changed so much, but it was certainly something that was a major part of their business. And yeah, so he just basically took that and applied it to the television medium.
You said he enjoyed himself a lot before he was assigned the dreadful duty of this new medium called television. Once he put his enthusiasm, his energy into it and his talent into it, and quickly ramped up, did he find enjoyment at some point? And because he was now dealing with, you're still dealing with talented people, you're dealing with actors, you're dealing with directors, producers, so
Well,
certainly TV side, but
yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I think whatever disappointment and disenchantment and disappointment he might have had probably lasted for no longer than a couple of days, because he was generally so upbeat, and he just loved the business and he loved talent. And a lot of people say to me, well, if he were still active today, how would he be dealing with artificial intelligence and the whole changing nature of the business with streaming and so on and so forth? And I would say that he would still be finding unique ideas and getting excited about it because he just loved all the aspects of the business, but he especially loved working with people who had talent. And it wasn't just people who were performers or actors who he fostered and mentored, but it was also people in the mailroom, like David Geffen, who wrote the foreword to the book. Started in the mailroom, and my dad saw the talent in him from a very early age, and they developed a relationship. And so my father really appreciated the opportunity that he was given to be the first trainee in the mailroom. And he just would always go in there and talk to them. He knew them all by name, and they all knew that they could come into his office at any time and seek his counsel. And so he just loved every aspect of the business. And certainly back on television, uh, that enthusiasm definitely was something he was able to transmit to others. In fact, he got the first big name star to agree to go on this little tiny box, and that was Loretta Young. And once she decided that television was a good opportunity for her, not only financially, but also in terms of creating content that was meaningful, everybody else started to jump in and they saw the nature of it. So it was an exciting time for sure.
I couldn't help but laugh internally when you were talking about the mailroom because we always hear about the stereotypical start at the mailroom or start in the mailroom at an agency and work your way up, which is what your father pretty much did. I mean,
Well, Ira, it was really one of these tests of character because I do have a chapter in the book where I kind of talk about the mentality of it. And basically, it was slave wages at best, and they had a requirement that you had to have a college degree to get it, but you were basically sorting mail and going out in the car and delivering stuff to clients and picking up checks at studios. And it was basically one of these ordeals that you had to prove that you had the right stuff by basically kind of tolerating and parking your ego at the door and being an agreeable, well presented young person. So it's something that a lot of the younger entitled people of this generation wouldn't have very much patience for.
Similar to what personal assistants do in Hollywood, where they do all the crappy stuff that nobody else wants to
But it
do.
was an unparalleled um, learning opportunity
Sure.
because you could see the inner workings of this machine. Like a lot of the people working as assistants for the agents, they would listen in on every single phone call. And so it was an unparalleled education. And so a lot of people who, maybe didn't make the cut or they felt like this wasn't for them, the experience that they got at an agency like William Morris was, as I said, you wouldn't get that in a 4-year college.
No, you wouldn't. Again, the book is called Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw. And it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the usual places. And Joel, here's a I was just thinking as you were talking, I want to get more into your dad's accomplishments, but what was it like for you growing up in that environment? Did it appear to be normal to you?
I can't help laugh, Ira, because I get asked this question quite a lot, and I really haven't found a specific enough answer to it. But let us just say that I knew it was something really special, that my father worked with a lot of really important people, and you couldn't help, even as a 3 or 4-year-old, think that it was strange um, that some actor who you saw on television would show up at your swimming pool on Saturdays to meet with my dad and kind of curry favor because my dad was still the power broker with a lot of these people, and was their gateway to further opportunities. And actors for the most part are, you know, from my experience, are pretty insecure people. They're kind of like, is the telephone ever going to ring again? And so they would come over and hang out at the pool, and I was in the pool as well, loving water as a young kid. But I saw that they were kind of phony with me. Like they would pat me on the back and say nice things, but they would, if they might even promise to do something with me or for me, and they would never follow through. So so I sort of felt like they were disingenuous, to put it
In other words,
politely.
the real Hollywood. Yes.
Yeah. So it was like, I think what happened was I just saw a lot of people who were fairly miserable, with some notable exceptions, but for the most part, they were not extremely pleasant people to be around. Those, especially with that grasping energy. And so, in growing up, perhaps it did me a favor in that I wasn't starstruck and I didn't think it was such an exciting business. It was only when I got out in the real world and I said, well, I see what my dad is excited about. And to be in a business where you can indirectly influence millions of people through the products that you're putting out. I just, at that point, and again, I was in my early 20s by that point, but as a young kid, I just had sort of a sour taste in my mouth watching all of it. I couldn't really understand. And in fact, the book was in a way for me to better understand my father's real talent. Because as a kid, you're seeing it, and what does my dad do for a living? You could just say in banalities, but he he was incredible at what he did, and to be able to discover in detail the way his mind worked was amazing because he wasn't very forthcoming with either myself or my siblings. So we had to uncover quite a lot of stuff that he was not willing to discuss with us.
Was there a reason why he was unwilling to discuss certain things with you?
Yes, that's a very important point, and that is that he he was very discreet. He had offers to write books for very large amounts of money, but that would be uh, it would be a mortal sin for him because trust was very important to him, and he would never ever say anything negative about a client because the rumor mill would go so quickly. And somebody might say, hey, I don't really know if I want him to represent me because I heard what he said about so and so. So he would not talk badly about anyone, and he just felt like part of his job was keeping secrets and keeping the trust with people, and that's why he had clients for decades.
Mhm.
So, as I said, I would have loved to have um, gotten more dirt from him, but the book is, there was some dirt in it, but not very much because I know he wouldn't have approved.
You actually answered partially my next question. I hate to ask questions that others have asked, but that was evidently my one about growing up in that environment was one of those questions that you probably would get. But what was it that made you decide to write the book? You certainly had firsthand knowledge, and I'm sure you did some research and you talked to either contemporaries of your dad, perhaps, or you were able to research in different ways to find out more about him. But what brought you to the point where you wanted to write about Norman?
Uh, well, I think that I felt first and foremost that his story needed to be told, that that it was a chunk of our cultural history that really hasn't been touched very well, which is we all know who Elvis and Marilyn Monroe and Clint Eastwood and Natalie Wood and Danny Thomas and Bill Cosby. These are names that are quite well known and their works are quite well known, but what actually went into creating their careers and supporting them. And and so that, as I said, is a chunk of history that hasn't been really revealed. So I wanted to give a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. But I also felt like he had done so much for so many people that I felt like his story really needed to be told. And it was so gratifying when I did reach people who were either clients of his or colleagues. They were just so delighted that I was telling his story because they felt like he was such a great person and they had such devotion to him that I couldn't get them off of the phone, basically.
Were,
And if anything, it was like they had so many nice things to say. Can't you tell me something not so nice about him? And so,
no, that was good. No, did you take notes or did you record the conversation? So
no, I recorded all the conversations. So,
that's good. So
yes.
you have an accurate feedback on it, which is good. Was anything a surprise to you with the people that you talked to or the research that you did? Was did something pop up, maybe more than one thing, that just bowled you over in the sense that you didn't know that about your dad?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, that's it's a kind of a question that surprises the information surprised me quite a lot because on one end, um, knowing the way that his mind worked, I could see that part of his genius was that he was able to cut to the chase, which is I'm having a problem cutting to the chase right now, but
Okay.
he had no problem. He would see uh, in a very cluttered mind, he would be able to go for that one little point that would crystallize what he wanted his client to do or to think about. And to give you an example, he had a friend who was having a tremendous drug problem, and they'd done an intervention for him at the hospital. And he was still very unwilling to do what he needed to save his life. And and my father was helpful with getting the Betty Ford Center started, and he got uh, Betty Ford and Gerald Ford to call this person in the hospital and say, there's a place for you, and we can help you out. And he was still very reluctant. And my dad, and he told my dad, I don't really want to go there because they don't let you use the telephone there. And because this guy was like a wheeler dealer making deals, and he didn't want to be without a telephone. And my father said to him, uh, well, there are no telephones at Hillside Memorial Park. And
Good.
that was a good example of
Right.
the way my dad's mind worked. The guy got it like right away and credited him with turning his life around and living a good life for the next 30 years afterwards.
That's a great story. You mentioned several of the people who were clients, big names, obviously, and Marilyn Monroe being one of the top, since that's part of the title of the book, too, Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of legendary Hollywood agent Norman Brokaw. Did he ever feel, I don't know what the word would be, in awe, I guess. Did he ever feel in awe of any of his clients, or was he able to communicate on an equal footing so they would listen to him and take his advice? Or were there a couple that just were so overwhelmingly charismatic that it even affected his thinking?
I don't think so because he had a very realistic sense of human nature. And he, as I said, he saw talent in people, whether they were performers or not. So his whole mission in life was nurturing that talent. And but he also recognized that he was a salesman, and but his product was human flesh and bones and emotions and people who had good days and bad days. And so George Slaughter, who brought Laugh-In to America in the late 1960s, had the best description of my dad. He said he was an agent, a manager, a lawyer, an accountant, and a psychiatrist. And I want to also add social worker as well to that. So
Mm.
I think he always saw it as just this exciting business. You're dealing with these people who are very gifted, but they're also very flawed. And how could he help them? So he didn't really set any boundaries in terms of what he could do to help someone. And that had to be done very carefully because there are certain clients that where their personal lives, even to someone that they worked with so intimately as an agent, was kind of off limits. So how he got involved with them beyond, hey, I've got a job for you, here's a contract, was something he had to play very carefully. But so he knew, um, if somebody needed help and they came to him, he could get them in to see the best doctors or the best therapists or whatever help that they needed. But a lot of people, uh, were came into the business because with great insecurities, and then you mix fame and fortune and notoriety into it all. And a lot of times those people just end up burning out. And so my father always tried to do whatever he could to be helpful, but he also realized some people didn't want to help themselves. And that's where you see a lot of talent coming to tragic ends.
He seems like a fully formed human being in an interesting industry because he was, as you say, very keen on human nature. And at the same time, he realized he was a salesman too. And yet he was able to balance those two and also recognize if, as you said, flesh and blood or bones and flesh and bones, that they could be very frail. And to be able to have that insight and still make it work on a commercial level as well as helping the person if they needed it. That's a rare talent, a rare skill.
Yeah, well, as I said, he just loved being an agent. He just loved everything about it. And he had offers to run studios and always turned them down because he really loved being at that agency because there was so much information there, so much possibility at his fingertips. And I think that running a studio like Paramount or wherever he might have ended up wouldn't have been as exciting to him, I think, as this business. And so
Probably
so he
right.
loved it. But I want to also mention to you that it all the success that he had in his business life did come at a cost because his personal life was not quite as successful as his business life. And as young children, my brothers and I realized very early on that he was a much happier person when in the confines of his office as opposed to being at home.
Mhm.
And and I think it's because basically, you're dealing with difficult people and challenging situations at work, but you can kind of close the door and go home. But when you go home and you're dealing with things like my mother's schizophrenia and all of the trauma that my dad went through with his own family, it's really hard to kind of control that in the same way.
Sure. When you were writing the book, we have a couple of minutes left, but when you were writing the book, did you have either a renewed appreciation of your father or perhaps a newer understanding of your father?
For sure. I think one of the misconceptions I had was that I felt like he was a workaholic, that he was almost deficient because he had no interests outside of show business. And I worked in show business for many years. I enjoyed it, but I also had a lot of things outside of work that I enjoyed, like gardening, scuba diving, cooking, you name it. I do other things. He didn't have that, and I thought he was deficient. But then talking to a lot of his clients, old clients and associates, they said to me that he was so much fun. You go out to dinner with him and you didn't have to talk about business. I realized that he was totally fulfilled with the network, the social network that he had through work, that he didn't need to go outside of it. And unfortunately, when he was in old age and declining, he didn't have anything to replace it when that part of his life started to dry up. And that was sad to see. But, again, the book is kind of a celebration of a really fascinating character who happened to be my dad, and I hope people will enjoy it.
One last thing before I let you go. If you look at the book in its totality, what's the one thing, or maybe there's two things you would like people to take away from the book? You've partially answered that with what you just said, but is there something that even more important that you want people to take away from the book?
For sure. I think that he was a person who had a generosity of spirit. He would always say kindness doesn't cost anything. And I think we're living in much crueler times, much more mean-spirited times. And I hope that people will read it and take away that um, th that relationships matter and that we don't have to strive after the trappings of success that society dictates us, that doing good work and investing in relationships and being generous yields rewards that can be far beyond our wildest dreams, because he certainly realized his wildest dreams and beyond.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been Joel Brokaw. He's author of Driving Marilyn, The Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw. It's available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and all the usual places. And for everything about Joel, you can go to joelbrokaw.com. And Joel, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Ira. It's really a pleasure.
Pleasure. And join us every Thursday for a new schmear on Ira's Everything Bagel.